Welcome to Sabbath School, brought to you by It Is Written. I'm Eric Flickinger, and today we are going to dig more deeply into God's everlasting covenant, the promise. Welcome back to Sabbath School. Of course, our guest today is Dr. Michael Hasel. He is a professor of Near Eastern Studies and Archaeology and the director of the Institute of Archaeology at Southern Adventist University. Welcome back, Dr. Hasel.
It's great to be here again.
So we've got a significant subject this week, which is not to suggest that any of our other subjects are insignificant, but this one's really important because it has a significant impact on end-time Bible prophecy, and that is God's covenant sign. So we're going to take a look at God's covenant sign, and our memory text for this week is in the book of Exodus. It's in Exodus chapter 31 and verse number 16. Here's what it says. It says, "Therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant." Now, of course, we're talking about covenants in this quarter, and here the Sabbath is described as a covenant. And when you talk about the Sabbath, especially within Christian circles, there's a lot of, what shall we call it, controversy regarding the Sabbath. In fact, in a recent papal encyclical, the Sabbath was referred to as the Jewish Sabbath. But is that really accurate? Is the Sabbath Jewish, or is that perhaps a misnomer?
Well, the Sabbath certainly has been kept by Jews for thousands of years, and they still see this as the highlight of every week and the great crowning of every week today. But the Sabbath goes far back, long before the Jewish nation was established. And we can see that in three ways in Scripture. We can see it, first of all, in Genesis chapter 2. We discussed at the beginning of this quarterly the foundational aspect of creation. And we talked about humanity being created in God's image. And we talked also about how humanity was the climax of the creation activity. But the crowning achievement, or perhaps the crowning event, or the crowning creative act of God, was the establishment of the Sabbath in Genesis chapter 2. And let's read this together, Genesis chapter 2, 1 through 3. "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their hosts, and by the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. Then he blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made." So here is this word bara again at the very end of this last sentence. Created and made, asa, the two words that are used interchangeably in the Genesis creation account. And what's interesting is that God doesn't complete creation on day 6. The text here explicitly says that he completed his creation actually on the seventh day. It says, "And by the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work." So the seventh day is part of the creation week, and it was set aside for humanity to spend time with God, to covenant with God, to tabernacle with God, and to be with God. It was a cathedral in time. It was a synagogue in time. It was a church in time, or a special time element that God had set aside for humanity. So this goes all the way back to creation, and this goes before the fall. There were no ethnicities yet. There were no peoples yet other than Adam and Eve. This was established for them, and it was to be established for perpetuity all through that time. The second place that tells us this is, of course, the fourth commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. And there in the fourth commandment, we see very clearly that the Sabbath, again, is tied back to creation. God now is writing with his own finger on tables of stone. And in verse 11, it says, well, let me back up. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God, and in it you shall not do any work, you nor your son or daughter or your male or female servant or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the seas and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Those three elements that are mentioned in Genesis 2 are repeated again here. He rested, he blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy. He set it apart from all the other days of the week as a special day for him and for us to commune with him. So even though we find this in the commandments that are given to Israel, the nation of Israel at Sinai, the reason they are to keep the commandments in Exodus chapter 20 points back to creation and what God established there. These are the two reasons to begin with that indicate very clearly that this was not just for the Jewish nation.
So he created the Sabbath. He made it long before there even was a Jew. And so to call it the Jewish Sabbath, or you'll hear some Christians say, well, the Sabbath, that's not for us, that's for the Jews. It wouldn't make any sense for God to create something for someone that didn't even exist. He created it for Adam and Eve, for their benefit, for their posterity, and then down through time. And of course, you and I get to benefit from that today as well. He was establishing it for all future generations as a gift, as an opportunity for us to unplug, to disconnect from the hectic life that we live, and to reconnect with him. Now, as you mentioned here in Exodus chapter 20, this is one of the 10 commandments, one of those things that God wrote with his own finger in stone. But this particular commandment is different from the other 9 commandments. I don't know if we would say it's any more important or less important, but there is something that makes it different. It stands out from the other commandments. What makes this one different?
Well, there's several things that are very interesting about this commandment. First of all, it's right in the center of the commandments that are given by God. It's at the very end of the first 4 commandments that deal with our relationship with our Creator God. Those are the foundation of our relationship with each other, which come in the next 6 commandments. And it is the bridge commandment between our relationship with God and really what anchors us in our relationship with our Creator from week to week, and our relationship with our fellow humanity. That's one thing that makes it different, perhaps, that it's in the center and it's very, very importantly placed there. It's also by far the longest commandment among the 10. There's a lot more detail given to this commandment than anything else. And there's something I'd like to read from a book by M.L. Andreasen on the sanctuary. He writes something, I think, that's very profound about the Sabbath here, and how it becomes a sign and a seal in a sense. He says, it is as if God is saying, contrasting it with the rest of the commandments, I will make one provision on my law that does not have any correspondence in nature, that will be a positive command to remember, and for which they will be unable to find any reason outside of my word. For the other commandments, man can see a reason. They appeal to his good sense. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not steal. But for this commandment there shall be no other reason than my command, and if they obey it, they obey me. And if they reject it, they reject me. I will make that commandment a test, a sign that I am the Lord. And he goes on to say, the Sabbath will be my sign, my test of obedience. The seventh day, not 1 and 7, and whoever keeps it obeys me. And men will understand this challenge. They will not be able to evade the issue. They will clearly see that in the acceptance of the Sabbath, they must accept my word by faith rather than by their own reasoning. The keeping of the Sabbath rests on faith only. I think that's quite profound in that sense, that God establishes the Sabbath at creation not because it's related to any natural phenomena that's out there, not like the day or the month or the year, but that weekly cycle that happens every week to remind us who we are in relationship to Him.
As we get closer and closer to the very end of time, this issue is going to become more and more important. It's important now, but it's going to increase in importance as we move forward. Ultimately, the issue is pure and simply faith. Do we trust God? Do we take him at his word? Or do we say, yes, I hear what God said, but I think, or the evidence indicates, or I've heard, or whatever, insert whatever else you would like in there. Or do you just say, I trust God. I have faith in him. I believe what he said, and I believe it enough that I'm going to let it impact how I live my life. Now, when we get to Monday's lesson, we find something else very interesting here. There's a third reason that can be found for Sabbath keeping even before the commandments were given at Sinai, and that's in the story of the manna. Let's take a quick look at Exodus 16, verses 4 and 5. Exodus 16, verses 4 and 5. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." Now, what law was God referring to here?
Well, there had to be a law, or there had to be laws that govern his universe and that govern this earth prior to the giving of the actual tables of stone, the Ten Commandments, and that happens 4 chapters later in Exodus 20. There must have been a law that God was referring to that already the Israelites knew about. Certainly Adam and Eve knew the law of the Sabbath. That was passed down from generation to generation. And here, Israel is being told that they are to gather manna, what is it? This miraculous bread that God provides them with. They are provided with this 6 days of the week, miraculously. If they don't gather it that day, they will not have food because it can go bad. By the end of the 6th day, they are to gather 2 times as much. They will have twice as much provided for them, and there will be no manna provided on the 7th day. So in this, we see several ways in which God reinforces the test of the Sabbath in this miraculous weekly event. First of all, on the 6th day, a double portion of manna is provided. That's a miracle right there, because one would expect that, nature would just take its course the way it did. Secondly, no manna was given on the Sabbath at all, and if they didn't gather the day before, they wouldn't have any. And third, the extra portion on Friday was kept from spoiling overnight as it did every other day. So God here is reinforcing the Sabbath keeping in several miraculous ways on a weekly pattern and basis so that the Israelites might know that He is the source for them and also the source of love and sustenance.
Of course, we can look back on that experience that God's people had in the desert, trusting Him for what they needed to survive in the manna. We can look back and learn lessons that we can apply to our lives today about trusting Him and knowing that He's going to work miracles in our lives as well. Once again, I want to remind you, if you are enjoying this quarter's Sabbath School lesson, please be sure to stop over at itiswritten.shop and pick up the quarterly guide that goes along with it, and that is The Promise, God's Everlasting Covenant. This is the companion to the lessons that we are going through this quarter. You'll be blessed by it. We're going to be back in just a moment and continue with our study with Dr. Hazel as we look at God's covenant sign. We'll be back in just a moment.
I really enjoyed your Beneath the Sands broadcast. The history of the Bible is fascinating to me. Including an actual archaeologist in addition to the pastor gave the information an interesting perspective and heightened its educational value.
I have the It Is Written app, and when I saw you do the ASL, I thought that was amazing. And I love the 1-minute devotionals.
We don't have church right now, so I really enjoy watching It Is Written.
Welcome back to Sabbath School, brought to you by It Is Written. We are continuing with this week's study on the covenant sign, and of course, our guest once again is Dr. Michael Hasel. Dr. Hasel, welcome back once again.
Great. Good to be here.
So let's take a look. Well, when we left, we talked about the manna and how God prepared His people to understand the Sabbath a little bit better, showed that it was continuing on by providing what is it. That's what literally the word manna means. By providing what is it, manna, for them on 6 days, but not the seventh day, telling them to gather and prepare twice as much on the preparation day as they would on the Sabbath. And of course, nothing came on the Sabbath. Now, without getting ourselves in trouble here, sometimes people ask the question, well, what are some things that are appropriate to do on the Sabbath and things that are inappropriate to do on the Sabbath? And specifically when it comes to preparing of food, I don't know how specific we want to get here, but what are some general guidelines that we might be able to provide based on the examples that we have in the Bible?
Well, the beautiful thing about the Bible and a beautiful thing about the manna was that, first of all, God provided. God provided every single day for them. And there is a principle, though, I think, that is found here that they were not to light a fire on the Sabbath. They were not to go through a lot of work. Of course, gathering firewood at that time was a lot of work. You had to find it. There are not a lot of trees in the Sinai Peninsula where they were located, and they had to go far probably to get that kind of resource. But there is something to be said about ceasing from our work on Sabbath and not going through as much work. I know at our home on Friday, it is a preparation day, and I know that we spend a great deal of time. My wife spends a great deal of time cooking and baking on Sabbath afternoon, and she is exhausted by the time Sabbath comes because of that work that she puts in. I clean the house, I mow the lawn. We all work together as a family. To do all of that on the Sabbath would be difficult for her. And I think that sometimes we have to keep those things in mind, that God desires us truly to rest in Him, and to have a time that we can just spend with Him and not have to worry about a lot of the things that occupy us during the week.
As an evangelist, I often have the opportunity to share this subject with people for the very first time. Maybe they're coming to a prophecy seminar or something like that, and they've never heard of the Sabbath, and it's a common question, what should I do and what shouldn't I do on the Sabbath? And you want to be careful not to end up like a Pharisee and start making a long list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. But I'll often give them kind of a rule of thumb, as it were, a litmus test. And there are some things that God specifically tells us we should or shouldn't do, but for others that may be a little bit more gray or we're not quite sure, I often encourage people, just ask yourself, is this thing that you're considering doing, is it going to draw you into a closer relationship with God, or is it going to distract you from your relationship with Him? And so it's the same thing with what we were talking about here with food preparation. Is that going to distract you from the time, the relationship, the time that you can have with Him, or is it going to draw you closer? Now, let's dig a little bit deeper here. On Tuesday's lesson, we come to an interesting term. God uses the term here, or the word sign, to describe the Sabbath. I'm going to read here from Exodus 31, verses 16 and 17. Exodus 31, 16 and 17. It says, "Therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day He rested and was refreshed." Now, where else do we see the Sabbath referred to as a sign?
Well, one of the places that we see that is in Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel was a prophet that was a contemporary with Jeremiah and with Daniel. And in Ezekiel, we find a very interesting passage in Ezekiel chapter 20 and verse 12 and verse 20, where Ezekiel is speaking specifically about the Sabbath, and he also is referring to it as a sign. Ezekiel 20, verse 12. And also I gave them my Sabbaths, verse 12, to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. So here is God's process of sanctification, of purifying Israel into the people that he wants them to be so that they can be a light to the nations and can be a peculiar people for the nations. And the Sabbath will be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I'm the Lord. In verse 20, that is repeated again. It says, and sanctify or make holy my Sabbaths, that they shall be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. So the Sabbath really is a weekly reminder. It is a weekly sign for me to let God know that I want to honor him. And when people see me keeping the Sabbath, they will see me doing something and maybe asking, what are you doing that for? Why are you worshiping on this day rather than this day? Why are you doing what you do on this day? And how does that impact your life? I remember when I was in graduate school at the University of Arizona, my fellow students couldn't believe that I was not taking time on Sabbath or Saturday to study for exams, for writing papers, doing all the things that they've been doing. How do you make it through this doctoral program without doing that? And I don't know what I would have done without that beautiful Sabbath rest. It was peculiar to them to see me in that way, to do what I did or didn't do what they did, but I was so much happier for it, and I don't know how I would made it through the program without that Sabbath rest. It was a blessing to me. And it became a blessing sometimes to others as I shared that with them as well. So the Sabbath was a covenant sign for generations because God said it would be. God wanted it to be a sign. God wanted it to be something that others could see the benefits of as they also reflected on what the people were doing. This is why the fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This is something that he was wanting us to accomplish.
All right, so let's build on what you just said. You quoted very perfectly from Exodus chapter 20, verse number 8. God says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Why does he use the word remember? What's the significance of remember? It's the only one of the Ten Commandments that he begins with the word remember. It's the longest of the Ten Commandments, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago. It's right in the heart of the Ten Commandments, but he starts it with the word remember. Why does he do that?
Well, I think there's two reasons for this, two very important reasons. First, God instructs us on what to do. He says, remember. But what does it mean to remember the Sabbath day? There's two reasons or a double meaning here that we could look at. One of those is clearly that we are pointed back to creation. We are to remember what God has done in creating this world and creating us in his image. We are his creatures, and because we are his creatures, we are to worship him in truth and in the Spirit. So one is that we are to remember what God has done in his creative activity, but the second aspect to this is that it also anticipates what we are to remember. To remind ourselves not to forget to keep the Sabbath. So we are to remember what God did in the past, and we are to remember what we are to do week by week in remembering God and spending time in community with him. So there's kind of a dual application or dual meaning here in this word, because as we sanctify it or set it apart for holy use, we remember that God blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. But then it becomes a blessing for us as we set it aside, and we are able to be blessed through communion with him on that Sabbath day from week to week.
You know, I think you draw out something very important, very significant here. He says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You and I, we don't have the ability to make anything holy. Only God can make something holy. And so when God here tells us to keep it holy, It's something that He has already made holy, and we are given the opportunity to enjoy the benefits that He has placed within that day more than any other day of the week. You made reference to when you were doing your doctoral work, taking that day off. I've heard so many other individuals, often medical doctors or dentists, who did the same thing, and they said, you know what, if God said, take this day off and rest from everything else, I'm going to trust Him and I'm going to do it. And somehow, probably by following God's counsel, they were able to excel in areas where other students who studied their best right through the day and didn't keep it holy, they didn't get that benefit. God has placed a benefit in that day that nobody else could place in there in any other day, and He gives it to you and to me to receive and to be blessed by it. Now, we looked at how the Sabbath can be a sign, but how can the Sabbath be a seal? We know at the very end of time, seals are going to play a significant part in end-time Bible prophecy. I know that you are familiar with many seals from the area of archaeology, but talk to me about how the Sabbath can be a seal.
It's interesting, we've talked about the Near Eastern treaties as they relate to the covenant, and we see here that the Near Eastern treaties also often had a seal impressed in the cuneiform documents that ratified that particular treaty. So here we can see, and in those treaties, by the way, two things were often done. The identity of the deity or the individual was mentioned, and secondly, the sphere of ownership or authority is given. The Sabbath is identified in the fourth commandment as the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. He is identified in that. And it's the only commandment where He's identifying Himself as the person that is authoritative over that particular institution. And in this way, the authoritative sign and seal of God is the Sabbath. And we acknowledge God's authority by keeping the Sabbath, which He has designated in that way.
And as you mentioned at the outset of our time together today, it's a matter of faith. There's nothing external that tells us, that shows us that this is the right thing to do, nothing logical that tells us this is the right thing to do, except faith in God and taking Him at His word. Dr. Hazel, thank you once again for joining us this week on Sabbath School as we've delved deeper into this incredible promise that God has made. Thank you once again for joining us on Sabbath School with It Is Written. God bless you. Have a wonderful week, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.